Hilchos Shmittah v'Yovel Perek Asiri, the laws of the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year, chapter 10. We spent 9 chapters about Shmittah, the 7th year. Now we're moving on to Yovel, the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year means every 50 years. They would count 7 rounds of Shmittah. 7 times 7 is 49. The 50th year was called the Yovel year, and it was treated in many ways just like Shmittah. You couldn't work the land, and all those laws applied, plus a bunch of other special laws. All real estate would revert back to its original owner, whatever was sold during that half century. Slaves would go free. A whole bunch of special laws about Yovel that would apply. We're going to see from now till the end of these laws. A big thing in today's chapter is going to be which year exactly was the Yovel year, and how exactly do you count them, and when did we stop counting them? Because nowadays we don't have Yovel. Nowadays we only have Shmittah. It's just 7, 7, 7, 7. We never stop for 50. Okay, let's get into it. We'll see all the details about this in the chapter. It says the Rambam Halacha Aleph. Mitzvah Saseh, it's a positive commandment. Lisper Sheva Sheva Shonim Ulekadesh Shnas HaChamishim. It's the court's obligation. They have to count, keep track of the years in pairs of 7, and then to sanctify the 50th year. After 7 rounds of 7 years, the 50th year is holy. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, V'safarta lecha Sheva Shabsois Shonim V'goymer. You have to count for yourself 7 sabbatical years. As the verse continues, Sheva Shanim, Sheva Panim, right? 7 years, 7 times. And then the verse continues, V'kidashtem Eis Shnas HaChamishim. And you have to sanctify the 50th year. 2 elements. Count the years, sanctify the 50th year. Ushtei mitzvahs elu misurim lebezdin agadol bilvat. These 2 mitzvahs are not up for every Jew free-for-all. This is a mitzvah for the court. The court needs to keep track. The court needs to sanctify the 50th year. Now says the Rambam, I have to walk you through Jewish history. When did this count begin? Every 50th year. Starting from when? When is year 1? So the Rambam says they began to count me'achar arba esrei shana mishenichnesu la'aretz. After 14 years of coming into Israel. Okay, take a look at this. I tried making a proper timeline. Couldn't do it fully, so I'm just going to have the year numbers. There's a big debate. Today we're in 5784, right? We say we're the year 5784. When is year 1? The world was created in the end of the month of Elul. The last 5 days of Elul, Chafei Elul, and then Rosh Hashanah, Aleph Tishrei was the 6th day of creation when Adam was created. So what do we do with those 5 days of creation before?
We don't come from creation. When Adam is born.
So that's what you think. And that's one opinion. That's true. But the Rambam's opinion is no. Year 1, those 5 days of creation are called year 1. Rosh Hashanah, of when Adam Harishon was born, is the beginning of year 2.
That's why it's not 2448.
Very good. That's why I wrote over here that Yetziat Mitzrayim was in the year 2449, even though most people know that it's 2448. It's the same year, just a question of when you begin counting. So we're going with the Rambam's count. The Rambam's count is, creation is year 1, in other words, those 5 days. Adam was born, created really, 6th day, that's the beginning of year 2. In Pesach of the year 2449, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. 40 years later, also just before Pesach, Yud ben Nisan, they crossed the Yarden into Israel. So in the year 2489, they entered into Israel. Now, even though they entered in the middle of the year, we don't count the rest of the year in the count. It says that it took 14 years to conquer and divide the land. We count those 14 years as beginning the next year, 2490. 2490 begins the 14 years. So at the end of 2503, Israel is fully conquered and divided. Okay? So it took 14 full years, really 14 and a half years we'll call it, because they came in Nisan of 2489. So at the end of Elul of 2503, the Jews had fully conquered and divided Israel. That's when they began to count. So in the year 2504, it says here the first Shmittah cycle begins. That's the year 1. How do we know this is the year? It says the Rambam, Shenemar, because it says in the verse, it talks about Shmittah, it says, Sheish Shanim Tizra Sadecha, V'Sheish Shanim Tizmar Karmecha. Before you count Shmittah, you have to have 6 years where you plant your field and you are pruning your vineyard. That means you have to have your field, your vineyard. Ad sheyeh kol echad makiras artzah. That means the whole count can only begin only once everybody knows which part of Israel is his. That took 14 years for every tribe to know let's conquer our land and divide it. V'sheva shanim asu b'kibush haaretz, v'sheva shanim b'chiluk. We know from tradition that it took 7 years to conquer the land and 7 years to divide it. Nimtzeisa omer. It turns out, now the Rambam says exactly what I said. It turns out that you say, Bishnas shalosh v'chamesh meis v'alpayim layitzira. In the year 2503 to creation. Me'reish Hashana me'achar moilad adam harishon. Reish Hashanah, the new year being after the birth of Adam harishon. Shehi Shana Shniya layitzira, which is year 2 from creation. The Rambam says the year Adam was born, Adam was created, is year 2. If you count that as year 2 and you keep going till 2503, hischilu limnois. This is when they began to count the next year, 2504. 2504 is year 1, 2505 is year 2, 2506 is year 3, 7 is year 4, 8 is year 5, 9 is year 6. When is the first Shmittah? 2510. V'asu shnas eser v'chamesh meis v'alpayim layitzira. They made the year 2510 of creation. Shehi shnas achas ve'esrim mishenichnesu la'aretz, which is year 21 since coming into Israel, Shmittah. They made that year Shmittah. If you keep counting by that numbers, 7 times 7 is 49. Umanu sheva shmitais. They counted 7 times Shmittah. V'kidshu shnas hachamishim, and they sanctified the 50th year, Shehi shnas arba v'shishim mishenichnesu la'aretz, which is year 64 since entering Israel, which as we know it is the year 2553. 2553, because if 2503 is when it ended, you have 50 years, 2553 is the first Yovel year. Then the Rambam kind of brushes through history. Shiva asar Yovlos or Yovlim, Manu Yisrael mishenichnesu la'aretz va'ad sheyatzu. The Jews managed to count 17 Yovel cycles. Really, we'll see it's 16 and a half. 16 full Yovel cycles they got, and they were in the 17th, from when they came into Israel till they went out. Let's take a look at the history just quickly. I touched every 50th year. So 2603 is number 2, 2653 is number 3, 2703, 2753, 2803, 2853, 2903 is Yovel number 8. In the year 2930, that's when the first temple was built. Now, according to the Tanakh, it says it in the verses clearly, that the first temple was built in the month of Iyar. Even though it was built in the month of Iyar, it's considered year 1 for its construction.
The 2029 is when they started to build it?
Finished building it. Finished building it. Yeah. And it says that the temple stood for 410 years. From Iyar till the end of the year is considered year 1 of that count of 410. So 2930, the first temple was built, but they still kept counting the Shmittah and Yovel. So look over here. 2953 is number 9. 3003 is number 10. 3053 is 11. 3103 is 12. 3153 is 13. 3203 is 14. 3253 is 15. 3303 is 16. So you see 16 full Yovels we got in the year 3303. Now 3339 was the Churban. Tisha B'Av of the year 3339, according to the Rambam's count, was the first destruction of the temple. And you see it says here, the count stops. So 3303 is Yovel number 16. How many years later is this? This is 36 years later. Right? So it will be in the middle of a Yovel. V'shana sheyatzuba, says the Rambam, the year which the Jews left Israel, they were exiled by Nebuchadnezzar, shecharav habayis barishayna, which the first temple was destroyed. Moitzai shvi is haisa. It was the year following a Shmittah. Ushnas sheishu shleishim bayovel haisa. It was year 36 of the Yovel, of the 17th Yovel. Because if 3303 is the Yovel year, so 3310 is the first Shmittah, 3317 is the second Shmittah, 3324 is the third Shmittah, 3331 is the fourth Shmittah, 3338 is the fifth Shmittah, the 35 years, 3339 is the year after Shmittah, year 36. So it was year 36 of the Shmittah. She'arba meyes shana ve'eser shanim amad bayis rishon. Because the first temple stood for 410 years. Again, 410 years beginning with that half a year the temple was built in the year 2930. So 3339 is the year 410. Kevan shecharav habayis, says the Rambam, once the temple was destroyed, batel minyan zeh. They just stopped the count. They didn't go year 37 now, year 38, keep track. They just stopped. Totally stopped the count, and they're living now in Babylon. Mishabatla. Now it took 70 years that the land remained in ruins. Jews were in the Galut of Bavel. That's when the Purim story happened during this time. And that's it. 70 years of destruction. V'nivne bayis sheni. 70 years later, the second temple was built. Second temple was built in the year 3410. Because 3339 was the year of the destruction, but you count the next year, 3340, as the beginning of the 70 years, all the way till 3409. 3410, the next year in Kislev, that's what it says, is when the second temple was built. So now, the Arba Meis ve'esrim Shana Amat. Second temple stood for 420 years. However, even though it was built in the year 3410, they didn't start counting yet the Shmittah and Yovel cycles. Only a couple of years later. Uvashana hashvius mi binyanai Ola Ezra. Ezra the scribe, Ezra HaSofer, who was still in Babylon, only came to Israel in the 7th year after or during the temple's construction, because the Persian king gave the Jewish people permission to build the temple, but it kind of stopped. It didn't fully construct. When Ezra came, that's when it was all completed. So Ezra arrives in Israel in the year 3416, which is year 7 of the building, because 3410 is year 1, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 is year 7. V'hi habiyah hashniya, that's called the second coming of the Jews into Israel. Umishana zu hischilu limnois minyan acher. From this year, they began a new count. That means 3416 is year 1. If 3416 is year 1, va'asu shnas shloish esrei libinyan bayis sheni shmita. So they made year 13 to the building of the second temple, the first Shmittah, 3422. Right? Because 16 is year 1, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. Umanu sheva shmitais v'kitru shnasa chamishim. And now that's it. Yovel is back in style. So they counted 7 times 7, and they sanctified the 50th year, which according to this count would be the year 3471. And there's a very important caveat here that Rambam adds now. Even though the Jews didn't observe the Yovel year as a separate holy year in Second Temple times, they incorporated it into the count to know when exactly Shmittah cycle was. So they didn't go like we do today, just cycles of 7 and 7. They would give the year 50 a space. They would call it year 50, but they wouldn't necessarily observe it. And the next year was year 1. So it still was going in cycles of 50. So now if you keep on going and you do the math, it'll turn out that the year in which the temple was destroyed with finality, in other words, the second temple, which we're going to call as beginning in Tishrei after the Churban, about 2 months, because the Churban was in Tisha B'Av. So if we don't count the year of the destruction, we count the year after the destruction, Sharei mitishrei hu haminyan l'shmitim u'le'yovel, because we always begin from Tishrei for the count of Shmittah and Yovel. Oisa hashana moitzai shviyis haisa. It'll turn out that year was the year following a Shmittah, ushnas chamesh esrei min hayovel hachi haisa, and it was year 15 of the 9th Yovel, if they would have counted it. In other words, if you keep going, do the math, the year 3815 was the final Yovel year. I misspoke before. Right, because they count renewed in 3416. This would be year 1. So every year 15 is the 50th year. So 3515, 3615, 3715, 3815 was the final Yovel year. And the second temple destruction happened in the year 3829. 3829 is 14 years after the Yovel. So the temple was destroyed in year 14 of the Yovel. The year afterwards, the Tishrei afterwards, 2 months later, the year 3830, is year 15 of the Yovel, which means it's Motzei Shmittah. It's the year after a Shmittah year. Now, says the Rambam, if we keep going with this, and we keep putting aside an imaginary Yovel year every 50 years, even though we don't observe it, ulefi cheshbon zeh, so according to this calculation, Shana Zu, this year, where the Rambam wrote the book, Shehi Shnas Elef Umeya V'Sheva L'Churban, which is 1107 years after the destruction. Shehi Shnas Shmoinim V'Shiva V'Elef V'Arba Meyes L'Minyan Shtaris, which is the year 1487 to the count of documents. Special count the Jews employed having to do with Alexander the Great. Shehi Shnas Sheishu Shloishim Mucha Meyes V'Arbas Alafim L'Yetzira. The Rambam tells you which year he wrote the book. in the year 4936, Hi Shnas Shmittah, V'hi Shnas Achas Ve'esrim Min HaYovel. If you follow the order, it would come out that the year 4936 should be a Shmittah year, and it would be year 21 of the current Yovel count. But that's not true. Because we know, Aval Kol HaGo'inim Amru, all the Go'inim agreed, unanimously, Shemaseides Hi B'Yedeyim Ish Mipi Ish, that it's a tradition in their hands, man from man, received all the way up. Shaleimanu ba'isana shivim shana, shabin churban ba'yis rishaynu binyan ba'yis sheni, ela shmitas bilvad v'lo yovel. That in the 70 years between the first and second temples, they only counted shmitas, not yovels. So unlike we said before that the count totally stopped, they still counted year cycles of 7, which is an even number because 70 years is an even 7. And therefore, so too, v'chein mishacharav ba'achreina. Once the temple was destroyed second time, loimanu shnasa chamishim. They stopped counting 70 years, the year 50. They stopped counting year 50 as yovel. Ela sheva sheva bilvad mitchila shnasa churban. The moment of the churban, since it was anyways the year after Shmittah, they began to count just 7-year cycles. V'chein oila b'gemara avodah zara cheshbon zeh shehu kabbalah. If you study the tractate of avodah zara in the Talmud, this same count is agreed upon. It's a good tradition. In year 15, which was the year after the Shmittah, they began to simply count cycles of 7, and every 7th year was Shmittah, no more Yovel. Ushnas HaShmittah, Yeduahi umefursemes etzel ha'go'inim v'anshe Eretz Yisrael. And the year of Shmittah, according to that, is well known. It's famous. All the Go'inim, all people in Israel, they used to keep it every year, they knew it. V'kulan leimanu ala l'shnei churban, mashlichin esen sheva sheva. They all counted, based on the years of the churban, divisible by 7s. Ulefi cheshbon zeh, according to that count, Tehishana Zu, this year, Shehishnas Sheva Omeya Ve'elef L'Churban, which is year 1107 from the Churban, will be Matzei Shvius, will be the year after Shmittah. The year 4935 is a Shmittah. The year 4936 is year number 1 after Shmittah, as indeed actually works out till today. Ve'alzeh anu seimchin, we rely on this. Ukefi acheshben azeh anu meirin, and we rule with this calculation, with regard to tithing and this keeping the Shemitah year and cancellation of loans, yesterday's chapter, says the Rambam, tradition and action should be your biggest pillars when ruling halachic law. If you know this year is Shemitah, even if the math going all the way back doesn't work, something has to be adjusted. Clearly the tradition of counting 777 after the Churban is the real count. Ubahen roi lihitales, and on them we should lean. As a matter of fact, if you keep going from the year 4936 and count cycles of 7, 5782, 2 years ago, which was the most recent Shemitah, comes out to be a Shemitah year. So since the Rambam's time, since the Churban's times, it's been going in circles of 7 years. It says that Rambam Halacha Zayin, Shnas Yovel Eina Oila Miminyan Shnei Hashavua. Back in the day, during temple times, when they used to count the Yovel year, it didn't count as part of the next Shemitah cycle. So if year 49 is Shemitah and year 50 is Yovel, after year 50 you start year 1 again. Right?
Again.
I'm saying if year 49 is Shemitah and year 50 is Yovel. Yeah. So you can look at it 2 ways, right? You can say year 50 is Yovel, but it's also year 1 of the next Shemitah, and 6 years later we should keep Shemitah. Or no, year 50 is a pause, and then the year afterwards we do year 1 again, and then Shemitah begins again. That's how they used to do it. Ela shnas tesha v'arba'im Shemitah, ushnas chamishim Yovel. Year 49 was Shemitah, year 50 was Yovel, ushnas chamishim v'achas, and 51 would be tchilas sheishanim shel shavua, would be the beginning of the new 6-year agricultural cycle. V'chein b'chol Yovel v'Yovel, and the same thing would be with every single Yovel. This is the common accepted halacha. Halacha ches mishagola shevet Reuven v'shevet Gad v'chatzi shevet Menashe batlu hayovelis. When Reuven, Gad, and Menashe, half of Menashe, were exiled, they were exiled first, before the first temple destruction. That's when the Yovel count stopped. Shenemar, because it says, a very core element of the Yovel is what the verse says, Ukrasem drer ba'aretz l'chol yeshveha. You have to call out liberty in the land for all of its dwellers. Bisman shekol yeshvei olah. That means that the Yovel only applies when all its dwellers live there. What does it mean everybody's living in Israel? V'hu shelo yiyu mu'urbavin shevet b'shevet. It means they're not mixed up, different tribes. Elo kulon yoshvin ketiknon. They're all dwelling properly. Bizman shahayovel noyeg ba'aretz, noyeg b'chutz ha'aretz. When Yovel was observed in Israel, it was also applying outside of Israel. Shenemra, because it says, Yovel he, it should be a jubilee. B'chol makom, ben bifnei abayis, ben shalei bifnei abayis, in every place, whether the temple is standing or not standing, as long as Jewish people are living there, that's what determines Yovel's observance. Halacha tes, ubizman shahayovel noyeg, during that time, when Yovel was observed, many mitzvahs could be observed. Noyeg din eved ivri, the law of the Jewish slave. You take him in for 6 years, 7th year he goes free. It applied back then. V'din batei arei chayma, the laws of homes in walled cities, which we'll see in chapter 12 about that. That there's a certain case where real estate in Israel can be sold forever. V'din sdei charamim, the laws of consecrated fields. V'din sdei achuza, the laws of ancestral fields. We had this in the end of the last book. Umikablin ger toishav, it was in those times when we could accept resident aliens, goyim who wanted to keep seven Noahide laws. And it was back then when Shmittah in the land and relinquishing of loans everywhere applied biblically. When there's no Yovel observance, none of these mitzvahs apply. With the exception of Shmittah in the land and Shmittah of loans, which only applies rabbinically, as we explained yesterday. Halacha Yud. There's another mitzvah on Yovel. Mitzvah saseh, litkaya b'shofar ba'asiri l'tishrei b'shnas haYovel. There's a positive mitzvah to blow the shofar on the 10th of Tishrei, that's Yom Kippur, in the Yovel year. O mitzvah zu mesura lebezdin tchila, this mitzvah is given over to the court at first. Shenemar, it says, v'ha'avarta shofar trua, you shall pass forth a shofar blowing. And then, v'chal yachid v'yachid chayav litkaya, then every individual would have to blow his own shofar afterwards. Shenemar, as it says, again, ta'aviru shofar, you shall pass or announce the shofar blowing. V'toikin b'shofar tesha, we blow the shofar 9 blasts. Tekiya, teruah, tekiya, tekiya, teruah, tekiya, tekiya, teruah, tekiya, kederech shetoikin b'rashana, the same way you do it on the new year. Uma'avirin shofar b'chol gvul Yisrael, and we sound the shofar throughout the boundaries of Israel. Halacha Yud Aleph says that Rambam, I'm not getting into the laws of the shofar, because shofar shel Yovel, v'shel Rosh Hashanah, echadu l'chol davar. The shofar of the Yovel year and the shofar of every year Rosh Hashanah is exactly the same for all matters. The echad Rosh Hashanah, the echad haYovel atkiyas. Both on Rosh Hashanah and in the Yovel year, the sounds are made. Ella, with one difference. Sheba Yovel taikin, during Yovel you can blow the shofar, bein bebezdin shekitshu bayas hachaydesh, bein bebezdin shalekitshu bayas hachaydesh. Number one, you could blow in any court, whether a court is reliable enough to sanctify the new moon, make the calendar or not. And also, v'chol yachid v'yachid chayav litkaya, kozman shebezdin yeshvin v'shlei b'fnei bezdin. And every individual has to blow the shofar as long as the court is in session, even if they're outside the presence of the court. Yud Beis, as opposed to u'beresh Hashanah shachal liyas b'Shabbos, on the new year, it falls out on Shabbos. Lo hayu taikin ela bebezdin shekitshu bayas hachaydesh. First of all, they could only blow in the court that was high enough in rank to make the calendar. The ein kol yachid v'yachid taikeya ela b'fnei bezdin, and every individual could only blow in the presence of the court. Yud Gimel, shloisha dvarim ma'akivin b'Yovel. 3 things are essential to Yovel: Tkiya, v'shiluach avadim, v'hachzara sadis lebaleim. Blowing the shofar, sending all slaves free, and returning all fields to their original owners. V'zuhi shmitas karka. This is called shmitas karka, the shmita of the land. Yudalid me'resh Hashanah le'adim kippurim, from the new year of the Yovel till Yom Kippur when the shofar was sounded. Le'hayu avadim niftarim levateyan. The slaves didn't yet go free to their homes. On the other hand, they weren't still enslaved to their masters. Nor did the real estate return just yet to their owners. The servants could just eat and drink and be merry with their crowns on their heads. Once 10 days into the year came, Yom Kippur came, Taku Bezdin Bashofar, Niftru Avadim Levateyan, V'chazru Sadas Leba'aleyan. The court would blow the shofar, and that was the moment that slaves would go free and real estate would return. Tesvav Dina Yovel B'Shvis HaSa'aretz, V'Dina Shmittah, Echadu L'chol Davar. All the laws of Yovel with regards to the land resting and the laws of Shmittah are identical, they're the same thing. Kol she'asur b'shviyis me'aveda sa'aretz, asur b'shnas Yovel, v'chol she'muter b'shviyis, muter b'Yovel. Whatever is forbidden in Shmittah, forbidden in Yovel, permitted in Shmittah, permitted in Yovel. O malachis she'leiken alein b'shviyis, leiken alein b'Yovel. Any work for which you get lashes on Shmittah, you get lashes on Yovel. V'din peiris shnas Yovel ba'achilo v'mechira u'bebior kedin peiris shvius lechol davar. And the laws of the produce produced in the Yovel year with regards to eating, with regards to selling, with regards to destroying, has all the same laws as the Shmittah year fruit. Tazayin yeseda shvius ala Yovel. There is an element where Shmittah is more strict than Yovel. Shahashvius meshametes ksafim v'lo Yovel. Only Shmittah relinquishes loans, not Yovel. The Yoser Yovel ala shvius. Yovel has over and above power over Shmittah. Shah Yovel moitzi avadim u'mashmit karka. That the Yovel releases slaves and causes the land to also be released back to its owners. V'zeu din mechira sodes ha'amuris b'Torah, which is the law relating to selling fields that are delineated in the Torah clearly. V'hi mitzvah saseh, which is a positive commandment. Shenemar geula titnu la'aretz. It says you should give freedom to the land. Yovel mashmit karka b'tchilasai u'shvius eina meshametes ksafim ela b'soifa. Of the two stringencies, Yovel's stringency goes into effect in the beginning of the year. All the land goes back. Shmittah's stringency of relinquishing loans only goes into effect at the end of the year, as we explained in yesterday's chapter.